So James O'Keefe did this video, which is the basis of the thread that Data Republican pulls up. DOD branch chief calls President Trump illegitimate, vows to resist him, everything he does. Listen to a few seconds of this.
The same guy who tried to overthrow an election is just like truly setting us down a path of dictatorship. He's illegitimate. He's terribly immoral, breaking every norm. We're going to resist him. Everything he does.
James O'Keefe here in Arlington, Virginia, in front of the Pentagon. The branch chief inside the Pentagon.
I responded to this and I said, the shit our national security state says on dates is absolutely wild. We don't need lie detectors or torture programs. We just need a small detachment of Miami 7s. And I left it at that because I was unsure what DOD branch chief entails. And even though this is like clearly violating chain of command type attitude inside the Pentagon, which we just discussed at the top of this episode, is so central to the necessary reforms. I thought that was very ambiguous. DOD branch chief. That's not really a title. What branch is it? Do you know what I'm getting at here? I thought, I don't want to weigh in on this story immediately, other than this little shit post to amplify it, because branch chief doesn't give me much to go on. But then I saw some variation of this image later on the timeline, and I thought, oh man, there's actually going to be a lot of really nasty stuff under this guy. And I didn't have time to diligence it, but I had a sense. So it says DOD branch chief for monitoring and compliance, synthesizing a broad national security background in law, public policy, and the military to tackle unconventional threats to clients in the DOD, intelligence community, and America's NATO allies. So we talked about the military role in rule of law programs. Public policy is again going to relate to laws and policies of the IC, meaning the CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon, and NATO. So we're in the heart of the blob. Unconventional threats. You guys see how it says unconventional threats here? This will get you. A lot of people, their eyes glaze over at that. But let me tell you what unconventional means. Unconventional puts you right here. Civil military and hearts and minds and psyops. Okay? Unconventional means it's not conventional tanks and jets and planes. Unconventional is where you get small wars and special forces. Today, they're often interchangeably used with the phrase hybrid threats, although hybrid is a little bit more directly in the social media space, but it's very much adjacent to it. Unconventional threats blend the civilian layer. And this was what JFK moved us towards in the 1960s when he established USAID and he gave the Green Beret to the Special Forces, toward an unconventional military model. Because after World War II, we stopped having, most of the military work was not about, rolling tanks into Normandy. It was about fighting in the jungles in Vietnam and working with the local populations. So you need to get the populations on your side. So you need hearts and minds work. You need to control the media as the military. You need propaganda. You need civil military. So as soon as I saw this word, unconventional threats, I thought, oh fuck, that's not good. This dude is doing DOD monitoring and compliance around NGO work, because that's how that manifests. This is NGOs, civil society institutions, university centers. That's who is onboarded in unconventional warfare. It's not just military to military. You are working with the institutions to wage a whole of society campaign. That's where they got whole of society from in the whole society censorship framework, the whole of society counter misinformation alliance. They got it from COIN. They got it from counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency is unconventional. So I thought, oh shit. Monitoring 21st century threats, adversarial foreign investment. Well, that's going to put you in counter intel. And that's where the Russiagate blobsters come from. This whole network. If you remember, I think they wanted to sort of invoke CFIUS on Elon Musk with this purchase of X, because there were like Saudi investors and there were like foreign co-investors. So this puts you very squarely in a really nasty place of the blob. So I thought, oh man, I bet this guy, and I saw a couple other things from this guy where I thought, oh fuck, I bet you this guy, because I saw some things around contracts, and I thought, oh fuck, this dude is connected to the NGO world. So imagine my shock when a couple hours later, Data Republican puts up this gobsmacking thread. And it really is gobsmacking. We're going to go through it now. Thread, U.S. Global Leadership Corporation, representing 400 NGOs. Nicholas Terza, the person who got exposed by James O'Keefe and O'Keefe Media Group, was featured in the following YouTube video by an interesting super NGO, the U.S. Global Leadership Corporation. In the video, he argues for the involvement of USAID and the Department of State in military operations. Now, as we covered earlier in this stream, see, I bring it all together, guys. As we covered earlier in the stream, USAID, Department of State, and Department of Defense is just the 3 Ds: defense, diplomacy, development. The Hillary Clinton 3D approach to fusing the Pentagon, the State Department, and USAID into a single blob. You understand? So what this guy who just got busted declaring himself that he's going to go around the chain of command at every opportunity is pushing through this NGO, representing 400 NGOs, the 3D model articulated by Hillary Clinton. That everything DOD does has to have State Department and USAID support in whatever fashion it can do. Okay, so let's listen to this video.
My name is Nicholas Terza. I was a U.S. Army officer for about 8 years. I believe smart power is simply
smart power. This is the Hillary Clinton concept. Hold on a second. I'm going to go straight to my receipts. So understand this thing, smart power, he's literally using the phrase. And this is, I don't know when this video she posted it from is. That would be useful to know. But this is not Nicholas Terza's, you know, the guy caught by James O'Keefe. This is not his concept. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so this was published by the U.S. Army War College in 2014. It's called USAID and DOD, Analysis and Recommendations to Enhance Development Military Cooperation. Okay, development means USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. The capacity building of institutions in the civilian sector that push an agenda that the military wants. That's USAID Pentagon cooperation, okay? That's what we're going to be pulling from here, and I'm just going to go in no particular order. Okay. In 2008, in order to clarify, formalize, and define the parameters of USAID's interaction with DOD, USAID approved a new civilian military cooperation policy. Does that look familiar? Civilian military policy, civil military. You see the connective tissue that connects DOD to USAID? So in 2008, so again, this is the tail end, July 2008, this is the tail end of the Bush administration, USAID approved a new civilian military cooperation policy, which included joint resource management and USAID-DOD cooperation, collaboration with the Pentagon, theater field levels, stabilization reconstruction. The policy can be seen as ambitious in its overall approach to mandating agency-wide cooperation between USAID and DOD. Are you also beginning to see here why I expressed at the beginning that I was elated about what was happening at USAID, but I was in that USAID was being greatly reduced and brought in line by making it accountable to state, but I was concerned about giving more funding to the Pentagon because that could simply continue the USAID function through the civil military layer at USAID DOD. There's mandated agency-wide cooperation, agency-wide, between the U.S. agency and the Pentagon. So if you're giving another $100 billion a year to the Pentagon, $1 trillion a year, there's going to be an absolute fuck ton of that is going to go into USAID functions, unless you've got the auditing, the accounting, the accountability, and the right staff in place to stop them doing rogue USAID type operations simply out of Pentagon civil military. It is USAID's policy for all operating units to cooperate with DoD in joint planning. Every operating unit at USAID has to work with the Pentagon. Humanitarian NGOs, you gotta love them. A pretty little face for the world's most powerful military. Do you think people in other countries like ever read U.S. Army War College documents like I do at 3 a.m.? Because this is public. When you see a hunger relief program along the Nile River in Africa, and you know that they have to be cooperating with the U.S. military, does it make you question what the purpose of this hunger relief program is? I mean, I'm like, imagine someone's like, listen, I see your room is a mess. I'm a humanitarian NGO. I want to come in and be your cleaning lady. Great. Okay. Yeah, I do need my room cleaned. I need to check with the U.S. military first. Is that all right? I would say, wait a second. What if I'm in the bathroom and you're cleaning the area around my computer? Why do you need to work with the U.S. military? Is there something in my apartment that you want? Joint evaluation, training, implementation, communication, all aspects of development activity where both organizations are operating and where civil-military cooperation will advance U.S. government foreign policy. In an interview, the director of USAID's Office of Civilian Military Cooperation, CMC, so the formal office at USAID for coordinating with the Pentagon in every single plot of dirt on planet Earth where both are simultaneously operating. Now, this makes sense. This isn't like a scandal. You would want them to be synchronized. But my point is, you have to understand that they do. Okay? One of the most important recent structural developments for civil-military coordination is the Defense Diplomacy Development Planning Forum, 3D, Pentagon, State Department, USAID, which was chartered in February 2011 to develop products and processes to improve collaboration among the three, DoD, State, and Aid. This also includes the Joint Staff, the Director of Political Military Bureau at State, Political Military at the State Department. So the State Department has a political affairs section, which the JFK files revealed were like 50 to 75% CIA operating under State Department cover, just so you understand. And it was 75% CIA in Saudi Arabia ahead of 9/11, as J. Michael Springman, the visa chief, revealed. And it was 80% in France, the political affairs section in the Paris Bureau in the 1960s. 80% of the people working in the political section at State were actually secretly working at State undercover for the CIA. That just came out a month ago in the Arthur Schlesinger memo to JFK titled CIA Reorganization, where he recites these numbers. One of the initial work activities of the 3D Working Forum was to create a unified picture of the three government's agencies' planning processes and cycles. So, State USAID Joint Strategic Plan, Department of State's regional strategies, USAID's country development cooperation strategies, they all need to be in sync. One last DoD doctrine of note on coordinating with our agency partners is the Promote Cooperation Initiative, through which the Secretary of Defense Joint Staff engages with DoD. They established this Promote Cooperation Forum, interagency between DoD, State, and USAID, which coordinates interagency initial inputs and follow-on contributions during in-process reviews of global and theater campaign plans. The plans are socialized with State and USAID. So every time, every single global or local campaign that DoD does, every single one, as early as the planning stage, is co-planning with USAID. Before they even have boots on the ground, how can USAID use its assets to help? And they do that in tandem with the CIA. You'll see that it says here, hold on a sec, well, they get into the Hillary Clinton thing here, but then they say, they use this concept of smart power, and that it was a Hillary Clinton concept, which is basically fusing hard power from the military and soft power from USAID. And here's the Pentagon saying USAID is shielded from the day-to-day knife fight of the interagency because it's not on the National Security Council, and that DoD has more affinity to work with USAID than State because aid does stuff. Okay, so that's all to say that if he argues for this, he's basically just arguing for Hillary Clinton's foreign policy.
Leveraging all the the tools that America has throughout the federal government to achieve national security objectives, business objectives, growth objectives.
Business objectives. Now you see why business is so attached to the war industry, because they're using the muscle. Every federal government agency in the blob is clearing the way for business. This is why you have business sponsors, from the oil companies to the mining companies to the retail companies to the agriculture companies, who pile drive into the space and lobby for it, because they get the battering ram of the blob to secure their business profits.
Objectives, growth objectives, all those things that are in the
Applejack said it. That's exactly right. Donors, drafters. Water Baby, you want to link to it? It's called USAID and DOD, Analysis and Recommendations to Enhance Development and Military Cooperation by Benjamin Caulfield, U.S. Army War College.
the national interest, and even at times for national values, and not just sticking with one set of tools when you have a wide variety at your disposal.
So notice what he's saying there. He's saying we should deploy this toolkit, USAID, State Department, military, not just about American interests, like economic interests, trade interests, or national security, like protecting us from attacks, peacekeeping during war, but also to advance American values. That's where you get the Hillary Clinton, Obama, Biden world. The values that they're articulating there are like LGBTQ pride parades and DEI programs and censorship laws, as the USAID SEPS program promoted. I actually don't disagree with this, let me say. It's nasty coming from him because the values that he's expressing are against the spirit of our Constitution. They're against the spirit of the First Amendment as they've been applied by the Hillary Clinton, Biden, Obama faction. But I actually do believe in leveraging the USAID function, the State Department, the military function, for advancing American values like free speech, because we have a First Amendment, and we've said for 80 years, we won the Cold War arguing that we should export the spirit of the First Amendment into the Iron Curtain. We should export the spirit of the First Amendment and use all diplomatic leverage and toolkit maneuvers to do so. I support that, but I don't support it for un-American values, especially ones that are straight up tyranny.
I think what I saw personally in Iraq and Afghanistan is so often the Department of Defense, mainly the military, was very well funded, and we had a lot of assets at our disposal and sometimes almost a blank check, but we didn't have the kind of subject matter expert, we didn't have the skills, and we really needed and wanted people from the Department of State, people from USAID, sometimes even from places like the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Transportation, to be working with us on the ground, because the nature of warfare as it is today requires far more than just the Department of Defense. This
is where you get the unconventional, right? You see where this is going.
Afghanistan, and trying to pursue counterinsurgency strategy.
I told you it would lead right back to counterinsurgency and the whole society. I mean, I literally said it, that the whole framework was grafted from counterinsurgency, and that the unconventional warfare was the counterinsurgency work. It's so funny.
We all the time would cooperate with the Department of State, and often Department of State counterparts from other countries, from our NATO allies, but because the Department of State for so long had not had enough of a presence, especially specifically in the south and in the west of Afghanistan, it hindered our ability to grow governance, because there was no way we were going to be successful in counterinsurgency unless we were also successful in growing the governance of Afghanistan.
And this gets us right back to the rule of law programs. Now you see why there's been an explosion of rule of law programs. And we saw, actually, 2 streams ago when we did the rule of law stream, that the U.S. Institute of Peace was actually tasked with growing the governance programs in Afghanistan. And again, governance is control over the government, okay? Setting up a puppet government whose laws you control, whose judges you control, whose prosecutors you control, whose elected officials you control. That's what governance programs are. Do you guys remember the Ukraine $1 billion loan? The $1 billion USAID loan. Do you remember Joe Biden? Well, son of a bitch. And they did fire him the next day. Firing Victor Shokin, the prosecutor investigating Burisma. And you guys remember how I told you guys, and I put it on the Joe Rogan show up on the Jumbotron, that was a USAID loan that was leveraged. They bribed Ukraine with $1 billion USAID loan to get rid of Viktor Shokin, who was investigating Joe Biden's son's company. Here's the loan. USAID, $1 billion loan guarantee that was issued in 2016. Here's USAID proudly announcing it. What was the loan guarantee for? To support the implementation of key governance reforms. These are the governance programs that he's talking about, except for Ukraine rather than Afghanistan. Do you see that? Literally, the USAID money was $1 billion bribe to give the Obama administration control over the government of Ukraine. You get this $1 billion, but you have to conform your government to what we want. You have to make governance reforms. That's what he's talking about here. All right.
My name is Nicholas Ryan Terza. I was a captain in the United States Army, and I'm a veteran for Smart Power.
Veteran for Smart Power. Again, Smart Power is that Hillary Clinton concept. If you guys want to just look it up real quick, Smart Power, Hillary Clinton. This was her big thing. Okay. Hillary Clinton, and the story is, oh, look, it's actually from that same, it's from that same NGO, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Okay, so it's the coalition, not corporation. Because I think the tweet says corporation. I was like, is it really structured as a for-profit corporation? It's probably a nonprofit or a project of a nonprofit, in which case it would be coalition rather than corporation. Yeah, so I think this is actually the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. But you'll see literally that very thing I was talking about, that the very first thing in Google is Hillary Clinton in the story of Smart Power. How friggin' funny is that? Here's the link here. And again, Smart Power is just fusing military hard power with USAID soft power. So let's now get this. The U.S. Global Leadership Corporation, no, it's coalition, right? Yes. Okay. On its YouTube channel, describes itself as representing 400 NGOs and businesses. Funny how they go together. The nonprofit NGOs and the for-profit businesses. And never the twain shall meet, except in a giant alliance to mutually advance each other's interests. Who do you think is paying the NGOs? USAID and the businesses. And they're in bed together. Great. Its mission, support the smart power approach of elevating diplomacy and development alongside defense. So yeah, they're implementing the Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, also the Mitt Romney, John McCain playbook to fuse them into one singular blob. Pentagon, State Department, USAID, one entity. Veteran for Smart Power. It's a broad-based influential network of 400 businesses and NGOs, national security foreign policy experts, businesses, faith-based academic and community. So it's the whole society. They're hitting all the layers. Government, private sector, civil society. And then the only thing missing here is media. In today's interconnected world, America must use all the instruments of national security and foreign policy. America's diplomatic and development tools are underfunded and undermanned, which is why the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition supports a robust international affairs budget. And note how they fuse these things together. Protecting national security by fighting terrorism and promoting global stability. You know what stability means. Under blob control, right? Back to that Ned Poland piece. Achieving democratic stability means stamping out populism and arresting everyone from the Law and Justice Party. Building, and right underneath that, building economic prosperity by developing international markets and expanding exports. So everybody wins, except the taxpayer, I guess. Right, because we're taking taxpayer money to give money to the military for the wars and to give money to USAID to give to the NGOs to install governance programs to make profits for the businesses. So they get the lithium, they get the cobalt, they get the aluminum, they get the copper, they get the gold, they get the steel, they get the uranium, they get the oil, they get the gas, they get the rare earth minerals, they get the wheat. Sounds great. Why don't you pay for it yourself? Why don't the businesses pay the NGOs to go out and do that instead of us, the taxpayers, paying USAID? Oh, because you want your profits subsidized. You want to use the battering ram of USAID, the battering ram of the State Department, the battering ram of the Pentagon to secure it for you. So you, the business, gets the muscle of the military, the diplomatic influence of the State Department, the NGO swarm created by USAID, and the money from the taxpayers. What do the taxpayers get when you've shipped your labor force to foreign countries and you've shipped your manufacturing plants to foreign countries? You don't even get jobs for it. It's a heist. U.S. Global Leadership Coalition is broken into two nonprofits. Center for Us Global Leadership, well, that makes sense. It is definitely a center for them. With a $10 million budget, that's the so-called education arm. And then they've got a C4 for lobbying. Standard structure for all this stuff. Yes, okay. So this is going to be to pump out propaganda. This is going to be to funnel money and lobby to politicians. All for what? For a bigger budget for USAID. It's literally a lobbying group that exists to build a bigger budget for USAID and State Department to give more money to NGOs to work alongside the U.S. military to control local politics in every country on earth. And as we saw, that was redirected homeward bound after Trump won in 2016. And they are now using this same thing of 400 NGOs to create what they are calling openly the NATO of NGOs. This is Norm Eisen and Jen Rubin.
We formed the NATO of NGOs, the NATO of protection. This is collective action. Norm, it is a breakthrough because this can work. This does work.
That's right, Jen.
The NATO of NGOs. You get hundreds and hundreds of USAID-funded NGOs together, and if the administration takes action on one NGO, all 400 of them file joint lawsuits. All 400 of them go out and do the media storm. All 400 of them run to foreign governments to create international pressure. All 400 of them work with blue state attorney generals. So they pumped up this NGO army working with the army to control governments around the world, and now that is a freestanding army to control our own. The roster of the advisory party for the Global Leadership Coalition is a Uniparty who's who, including Hillary Clinton, of course. I mean, we just saw she's the smart power Secretary of State, the USAID Secretary of State. But a few notables that I saw. James Baker. We're back to James Baker. Who else is on the board? Thomas Donilon, the 2010 National Security Advisor for Barack Obama, who we've now done probably 5 hours of content on. Tom Donilon, BlackRock Investment Institute. So this is who is lobbying for more USAID funding to work alongside the military to clear the way for hedge funds, private equity funds, and for-profit corporations to make billions of dollars because USAID and the Pentagon and the State Department have all contorted a country's government into allowing it to be plundered by BlackRock. National Security Advisor for Barack Obama, literally doing all three things from the 3D model. Responsible for the integration of foreign policy from the State Department, intelligence from the CIA, and military. He chaired the Obama-Biden transition at the State Department. He headed Obama's debate prep. Distinguished Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Senior Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. The CIA squad there, the head of it, won the CIA Distinguished Medal Award, or had the top intelligence unit in the military. Now he's at the Harvard Belfer Center, which we've gone over as this crazy history from the Harvard Center for International Affairs, the CIA at Harvard, literally. He's on the board at Columbia University. We did that whole CIA and the university stream about Columbia University and the CIA. Aspen Brookings Trilateral Commission. He was Assistant Secretary of State and Chief of Staff at the State Department under Bill Clinton. His major policy initiatives included NATO expansion, and he's received the Secretary of State Distinguished Service Award, the National Intelligence Distinguished Public Service Award, the DoD Medal for Distinguished Public Service, the Joint Chiefs of Staff Joint Distinguished Civilian Award, and the CIA Directors Award. This is the guy on the board of this lobbying arm for a bigger international budget, the very thing Trump ran on stopping, the very thing that is being crushed by the reforms at USAID and State right now. This is like the heart of the lobbying group to stop everything Trump world. You bet your ass these people are going to be involved in things like the Tesla takedown, in the lawfare that's happening to stop the shutdowns. They're going to be involved in every element of it. Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State for Bush, Hillary Clinton. Okay, so she's got receipts down here. In addition, Madeleine Albright was a founding member, and Colin Powell served as honorary chairman of the advisory committee. So more secretaries of state adding to the lobbying heft. Now, Madeleine Albright was also the chair, the head of NDI, the DNC branch of the CIA, the DNC branch of NED. She was the chairwoman. Remember I talked about earlier here with Nina Jankowicz, how she was an NDI, the DNC branch of the CIA cut out NDI. Madeleine Albright was the head of it. So again, they're calling it 3Ds, Defense Development Diplomacy, but there's a C at the end of that, which is CIA. CIA does the support for state, DOD, and USAID. That mushy ground in soft power land. So no surprises, Madeleine Albright is also on this board. Plenty of private sector interest. For example, Karen Bhatia serves an active position on the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, is currently serving as head of government affairs and public policy at Google. Hey, do you remember, what was it, 2 streams ago when we did our rule of law stream? We saw Google was also a sponsor and participant in the World Justice Project, which was another one of these CIA, State Department, USAID programs specifically designed at achieving governance control through rule of law, through controlling the courts and the prosecutors and the judges. So Google is both lobbying for more money to the NGOs to change countries' laws, and they're lobbying for more money to those, and then they are working with the NGOs directly to achieve those governance reforms, to bring them under control of the blob so that they can get profitable operating conditions for Google. They'll buy Google services. They'll buy Google as the IT backbone, like USAID forced Ukraine to do with the DIA app, the state in a smartphone app. And of course, World Justice Project gets all that USAID funding, as does its, the thing it spun out from, the American Bar Association. So Google is lobbying for its pet NGOs who manipulate governments on Google's behalf to get more money from the taxpayers, and then they're working directly with the NGOs so that they make the exact governance reforms. It's obviously going to be a lot more than just Google, but Google is the number 4 biggest country in the world. Co-chair Sean Callahan from Catholic Relief Services, who gets USAID money to bring in illegal immigrants. Great. The more local interest, Senator Mike Lee may want to know that Utah's junior senator is already involved with the super NGO. Utah. It's a fascinating place, Utah, in international statecraft. If you know, you know. The biggest backers of the Global Leadership Coalition are Bill Gates Foundation and George Soros Open Society Foundation. Well, there it is. The NGO swarm. I mean, think about that. These guys are all getting hundreds of millions of dollars from USAID and the State Department. And they're funding the lobbying group to force Congress to give more money to them. Think about the return on investment in that. The Open Society Foundation its organizations have gotten hundreds of millions. I think we just saw this, even just a few alone. 270 million, Open Society, Soros, USAID. Yeah. USAID gave $270 million to a Soros NGO just in one case. So they're kicking in. Think of the ROI on that. By lobbying for billions more to USAID and state, and they're giving $250K, that's an investment in something that nets you far more. And the Gates Foundation has gotten hundreds of millions, I think low billions over the years, for all of its projects that are USAID projects. USAID is huge in public health. It's huge in the vaccine space. Huge. The $15 million payout to the Wuhan Institute of Virology came from USAID. So they're not just getting the money from the taxpayers, they're lobbying. Gates and Soros are not just getting the money from taxpayers, they're also lobbying the government to steal more money from taxpayers. They're on both sides of it. Amazing. I'm sure it's an independent determination that they're getting the money, huh? Liz Schreier, the president and CEO of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, also claims to serve on USAID's advisory committee. In the past, she also served as political director of AIPAC. I found a 2024 article where she took credit for circumventing USAID and getting her own $95 billion budget passed. Good God. What did it take to get a $95 billion bill through a divided Congress? In 2024. Liz Schreier was in the room, many of the rooms where it happened. Is this DevX? I think this is DevX. I can tell by the font. What did it take to get a $95 billion bill? This is how steeped I am in USAID world. What did it take to get I bet you it's DevX, $95 billion bill through Congress? Liz Schreier. Yeah, it's DevX. DevX is like the giant, it's like the world's premier USAID insider website. I don't have the premium on this browser, but it's this is actually a great site to mine for intel. It's actually the best, probably the single best. It's just so funny. Liz Schreier remembers members of the U.S. Congress bragging they didn't own a passport. She says in the mid-90s when she created the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, a network of over 500 businesses, nonprofits, and others focused on strengthening U.S. development diplomacy. Yeah, businesses just want more it's completely self-interested. They don't want more U.S. development diplomacy. They want more personal profits. And they want taxpayers to pay USAID and the State Department to bolster their own profits by implementing pressure programs and lobbying programs and leveraging the power of the U.S. government to make it happen. You're paying for it. At that point, once the Cold War ended, much of America had begun to turn inward. A lot of our fellow citizens said, we won. We don't need these tools of the State Department and Peace Corps and USAID. Oh, that's weird. Why do you lump Peace Corps in there? Just last stream, we did a whole thing on the CIA and Peace Corps. So the Cold War ended. We don't need this giant Machiavellian CIA superstate, right? And she says, no, I proudly turned them around and said, no, actually, we can take over the entire world. This thing was never about the Cold War. Now our enemy's out of the way. Nothing can stop us from taking it all over as long as Americans pay for it and the profits go directly into the coffers of hedge funds and private equity funds and international banks and huge multinational corporations who aren't headquartered, who don't do their primary operations in America. As long as Americans pay for that. Oh, here's all the Open Society Foundation grants. Okay, so we got over $1 million here. Bill Gates Foundation provided the vast majority of its funding over the years, $71 million. $71 million lobbying. Does anyone have the total number of how much the Gates Foundation has gotten directly and indirectly from USAID and the State Department? That'd be a great news headline. I bet you it's in the billions. I've seen just an incredible glut of those. I actually was the one who broke the news story, if you remember, when there was the 26 NGO, Breitbart 26 NGO threat letter to Elon over X, that 13 of these NGOs were funded. I actually broke that story. I did the research for it. It was actually one of the first things that FFO did. Let's see, Foundation for Freedom Online. So even then, half of the NGOs were funded by Bill Gates. I'm sure they were also funded by USAID. But I did a whole thing on this if you guys are interested. No, the Gates Foundation is right on par with the Soros network. It's just a little bit more targeted, where Soros is like generic political control everywhere. These are on things like public health, vaccines, climate, abortion, and then a fair amount on politics. But Soros is like extreme politics, like directly works with the State Department. The Open Society Foundation is like a literal attachment of the State Department. And we went over State Department cables from WikiLeaks on exactly that in a stream last month. Private sector involvement's rampant. J&J, how much do you think Bill Gates has invested in J&J? Remember the J&J vaccine? J&J, one of the biggest pharma companies. The whole thing is funded by pressure from the NGOs to secure, the NGOs are saying, you have to take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And Johnson & Johnson is lobbying Congress to give more money to the NGOs, who are then telling everyone you have to take Johnson & Johnson's product. What a racket. Disney, of course, the major media conglomerate, which also relies on governance programs for distribution of its products and services, as well as for everything from labor to trade policy. Walmart, as I mentioned, the retailers. Google, Chemonix, of course, Chemonix. Chemonix is the largest, I think, number one or number two largest recipient of all USAID money. So while Chemonix is the biggest recipient of USAID money out of everyone the USAID funds, number one. I think they're not. They used to be number one. They may be number two now. Chemonix, largest USAID recipient. Ha! Okay, so they're number two. 4.5 billion. Who was the number one largest recipient? Catholic Relief Services, the head of which co-founded the lobbying group. Isn't that amazing? Now, by the way, one quick thing on Chemonix here. Let me pull this up. Just so you understand, again, back to smart power. It's just CIA work, guys. The State Department, USAID, It's just CIA. It's just covert, plausibly deniable soft power influence. And Chemonics, as you'll see, the second largest recipient of all USAID funding, $4.5 billion of our taxpayer money went to Chemonics. Here's the quote. Every time I mention Chemonics, I stress this wormhole is at the dark heart of how USAID does what it does, operating as a private, self-sustained, standalone, off-the-shelf CIA. Mr. Murphy said when he started Chemonics in 1976, because I've always wanted a way to do two things. One, have my own CIA, and two, be helpful to people. It's a private CIA. That's what it's contracted for. It's the Blackwater of NGOs. And it just lost its place, I guess, to Catholic Relief Services, who beat it out by $100 million, 4.6 to 4.5. And Catholic Relief Services, so the co-chair of the lobbying group to force taxpayers to give more money to USAID, is the CEO of the single largest USAID recipient. Oh my God. So the single largest NGO recipient of USAID money, the head of it is the co-head of the lobbying group staffed with giant corporations, CIA officials, State Department secretaries to force American taxpayers to give more money to USAID, to give more money to Catholic Relief Services. And Chemonics also sponsors it. So all of the top USAID recipients are paying the lobbying group to get more money to USAID to give to them. What a racket. So there's no independent allocation whatsoever. The number one and the number two largest recipients of USAID money have come together in a common 501c4 lobbying shop to get themselves more money allocated through Congress by lobbying the congressman. Who's the big loser in this? You and me, because the Congress people are taking our money, which they're pressured to take by the financial leverage of the lobbying group of Chemonics and Catholic Relief Services, just so it goes straight to them. Oh, that is too good. I've heard so many of these stories from the inside. I've spoken to so many members of Congress and so many staffers and so many people around the Hill about this process. But here you have it. Here you have the exact organization doing it. Oh, that's incredible. Of course, the Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's in on it. We're back to the Coke and Pepsi coups. Okay, we're going to finish this. We're going to finish this thread on Sunday, okay? And I'll do a recap of what we just found there. But I got to get going. What do we end with? We got to end with something epic. I guess I got to keep rambling. We're only going to listen to like a minute of this, but we got to end with a vibe.